work by reading. So I first learned about you by reading about your work. And so I'm so glad that I reached out to you and that you were like, yeah, I would join you in this seminar where you all are exploring environmental justice and thinking about healing and relating to the work of how we balance our kind of lives in grappling with questions of ecological grief and the moment that we live in right now. And so, and this quarter is actually you're visiting in environmental studies and in the introduction to environmental studies.
Yeah.
So really glad that you can join us today. The title of the talk is Reconnecting to the Body with Heal and Transform. So welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all and chat about this topic that's like very near and dear to my heart and my work and kind of the work I do and want to continue doing in the world. So yeah, and if you can't hear me online, please just like put it in the chat and I can try to speak up. But I wanted to start out, since we are talking about the body, with a little exercise to just like check in with yourself and where you're at. But before I do that, I just want to say, like, you are your own, you have agency here. So if you are not up for checking in with your feelings or like how you're feeling in your body, that is up to you to decide. Feel free to like not participate in that. Yeah, so that said, first, maybe will happen, maybe not. Okay, so first, anybody hear of the feelings wheel? I see some nods. It's basically just a wheel that has a lot of different emotions on it, and it's in the middle, it's broken up into some like more core emotions like happy, sad, angry, and then around it are all these other kind of subcategories, I guess, of emotions. And this is just a really helpful tool if you need some help checking in, identifying how am I feeling, like what's the word for that. So I put it on the screen. You may not be able to see it, but the invitation here is to just take a moment and check with yourself. Like, how are you feeling today? What emotions are present? And as you do that, kind of letting things come to the surface, seeing if you can see if there are any sensations in your body that connect to that emotion. And to give you a little bit of context, the language that the body speaks to us in sensation is through temperature, so like heat, coolness, pressure. So maybe you feel like tightness in your chest, or you feel kind of like looseness in your arms and your legs, and movement. So like beating of the heart. Maybe you can feel digestion happening. Maybe there's some kind of like tingling happening somewhere in your body. So just taking some time to check in and noticing, what emotions are present for you right now. And if you feel them, if you feel something in your body connected to that emotion or not, or maybe you don't feel any sensation at all. This is kind of the fundamental pathway into working with the body, reconnecting with the body. And I'll dive more into why that is important and what that does for us in the context of the environment, connection to the environment, and especially ecological grief and other kind of challenging feelings. So anybody want to share how they're feeling or, yeah, thanks.
I feel stressed,
Okay.
like what midweek. And the pressure's really hot right now.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sean. But yeah, just a lot of pressure. And,
Anything in your body that's telling you that?
no, it's mostly my head, like the mindful of it. My movement, I don't know, like maybe my hands are shaking a lot. The temperature, well, yeah, kind of rising, but not right now. Sure, it's definitely like the highest of all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
My best friend told me she got fired today. So I was really sad about that for her and really worried about her because she really liked her job. And I get really bad tension headaches. I've had 4 concussions, so I know a headache is a headache to me now, but I do equate my anxiety and sadness for her coming through as that.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear that. I also have some concussions in my history, so I get that. Great, yeah, hopefully you all kind of were able to identify a little bit or lack of that, and that's okay too. So a key kind of part, I guess, takeaway from that exercise, but also just in general, is that our bodies store information. So we're constantly interacting with our environment, whether we are conscious of it or not. You're walking on the street, you maybe hear a car zooming down the street, you're going to look toward it, right? You're going to be like, whoa, what's going on? That's your body instinctively reacting, right, to your environment. And that's just how our nervous system works. And as we do that type of interaction, or how we have that kind of interaction over time, our bodies start to store that information, and it becomes kind of a way that we're shaped or molded. Things that might be just a response to a single incident. If something like that happens repeatedly over time, it becomes habitual. So, environmental stress is a big issue, especially in the context of noise pollution or air pollution, or kind of constantly being exposed to some, whether it's, I don't know, areas that don't have enough trees and kind of always being in gray infrastructure, not having a lot of access to green space. These are all some types of ways that environmental stressors in our environment, in the urban setting, for example, can accumulate over time. And in addition to those environmental stressors, other factors that shape us, right, are the cultural environment that we're in, the stress we feel in our daily lives, as you mentioned, from schoolwork to jobs, relationships, systems of oppression, and experiencing those, living in those based on your own identity, trauma, whether it's interpersonal trauma, collective trauma. We'll get a little bit more into that, norms and expectations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we can think of, again, the environment not only as our physical environment, whether it's the built environment, the natural environment, but also our social environment, our cultural environment, political environment, economic environment. All of these things, our body is interacting with on a regular basis because we're just taking in cues. That's just how we work. Cues, 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 and then we're responding to them. So it's like an iceberg. I like to use the iceberg metaphor a lot. It works in a lot of different situations. And in this case, icebergs are shaped, right, by air, by water, by other environmental factors. And that's, you can think of it like our own nervous systems, or kind of holistic mind, body, spirit is also shaped by a lot of different factors over time. And I want to highlight the scales of shaping. So that can be on an interpersonal level, kind of maybe in your household or an intimate network. Can also be in your community or your neighborhood. Can be at the level of institutions like the UW, at level of society, and beyond. But all these different scales were being shaped. And that shaping, as I said, over time, initial experiences or one-time events can accumulate into patterns, habits, in how we are. And I think the main thing I want to point out from this is that there's history. So we are our like current present day manifestation of a lot of history behind us, not only what has happened in our own lifetimes, but also what our parents have been through, what our ancestors have been through, what our society has been through. And that's a core kind of, I guess, takeaway of what we know about somatic psychology and neurobiology, is that we are not just this present day snapshot, but that we have a lot of history in our bodies already. So I pulled this quote from the reading because I just really love what it shares, what it expresses, and how it captures that concept. So I'll just read it. In the mirror, I search the landscape of long fingers, dark hair, a scattering of beauty marks. Read what has been written onto flesh, the deep brown of eyes, the narrow hips of my mother, the thick lips of an ocean people. Balance on my legs as though they are the deep roots of trees. It is a good gravity to be filled with the weight of stories. In defined capture, spoken stories take meaning in the voices and the bodies, the minds and the memories of those who carry them. It is a good gravity to be filled with the weight of stories. Does that evoke anything for anybody? What comes up for you? I see some nodding over here. Yeah.
It makes me think of my grandmother who came here from Mexico, just because like the way that this is written is kind of like how my mom always spoke of her and how like us as her children are, like how she sees us living by her and by who she was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Anybody else? Do you feel like, oh,
It feels like it's like, I mean, I don't know.
yeah, come on, Ela.
It feels like it's like it's a little unfair in that I think it is a gravity to be filled with stories.
Mm,
I don't know if it's always a good thing.
mm. Yeah, it's complex, carrying a lot. Mhm. Does anything come up for you around like what I just shared about our bodies carrying information and yeah, anything evoked from that? Anybody online too? Yeah.
With gravity, like I think I like thought of it in like a celestial and also like a cosmic type of like scope of like we're all made up of like the same type of elements and like only sourced by like particular like explosion of whatever star, and like that's what like our earth looks like and life looks like, and like and then also here we are and we're like I was like very meta, but like that's what I feel when I read that.
Yeah.
And like it's very can be taken down to like a very physical chemical level and like elemental level, but also like stories and meaning and like all the things that are not physical also are like very real.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think to the former point about how our bodies receive information, I think that's very subjective, and it depends on person to person. So I think it's really important to look inside yourself and understand what are the things that make you feel a certain way physically or vice versa. Yeah, just connecting deeper with yourself and understand you.
Thanks. Did you want to add something?
Oh yeah, I was just saying like I was rereading it right now again too, and I guess like another thing of like what they remind me of is like also like immigration memories as well. Just because like the way that it talks about too, kind of like what's it called, like the big rivers of ocean people and stuff like that, just stories of like the good things and bad things and everything, like families that did immigrate to their children's lives and stuff like that.
So I'm reading slowly a book called It Didn't Start With You, and it's talking about epigenetics, which is the basic transference of trauma. through your genetics that get embedded in your genetics. I work in a lab, so I'm around science a lot, and it's very interesting to me. And that's like when I saw that and the gravity of the stories. I mean, I think there's a beauty to holding space for what has happened to your family and the negative connotations with that, and still being standing. But that's really where I went with it, was the passage of trauma, so to speak, and how that affects a person through the rest of their life, and in ways that they didn't even know that was affecting them. That was from past trauma of their ancestors.
Mhm, mhm.
Dude, Sandu, what's the name of the
It
book?
didn't start with you.
Sounds great. Just like share that resource afterwards. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for sharing that. And that's a really good segue. Because yeah, so for me, I think one element of this and just the reading in general, and if we have time, I'd love to hear some of the NVQs or the notice value questions that you wrote, but I don't know. Well, I want to save time for your own questions, but
have set that up very well for you.
okay. Okay, thanks, Eli. It's okay. One thing that I love about that reading, and that the reason why I chose it, A, I just think it's beautifully written. B, I appreciate the perspective of the author. C, it's from a book I really like. And D, is that, yeah, I think the language and her stories really express that transference of both trauma, but also the concept of resilience. And resilience itself is a very complicated word. But I think to me, when I read this piece, it evoked like what the strength and resources meaning cultural, identity and joy, traditions, meaning, all of that, that this person really felt. And a lot of the naming of like the body, the parts of the body, to me really expressed how all of that lives within, quite literally, this person's tissues and bones and structure and expression. So yeah, but I'd like to continue on. There was the notice value question. And just to briefly talk a bit more about trauma, because that kind of gets the segue into the healing, right? So this is just a definition that I tend to use from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Trauma results from, quote, a single event, series of events, or set of circumstances. So a single event, series of events, or set of circumstances or conditions that's experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that is lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and well-being. And again, kind of taking this concept of scales that I mentioned earlier, from the individual to the household, intimate network, community, institution, society, beyond. Landscape is not on here, but landscape is certainly a part of that. What happens to our land, everything from colonization and disconnection, of land privatization, all the ways that the land experiences trauma and beyond. All of that can be affected, and across time as well. I could get into a lot about the safety strategies, but I'll not. And for now, I'll just say that, right, our body's response to what is happening, what it's exposed to, it's all to try to be safe. And all of the responses that we have as individuals and as society are smart. They are attempting to make us safe, and they're all valid. So, and specifically, when we're talking about environmental and climate-related trauma, there are three categories that I like to talk about that I'm borrowing from this book by Resman Menakem called My Grandmother's Hands, which is about racialized trauma. And he talks about 3 different types of trauma: primary trauma being a direct experience, secondary trauma meaning experiencing, observing or witnessing trauma, or kind of indirectly participating in it, and historical trauma or intergenerational trauma. It's trauma that is from centuries past that epigenetics tells us that we actually have in our genes or could have, depending on our histories and identities. So, primary trauma, experiencing extreme weather events, experiencing wildfires, things like that, even anticipating potential trauma in the future, anticipatory trauma, secondary trauma is like witnessing this, being exposed to it, and historical trauma, again, like I mentioned, some of these things, colonization, land privatization, extractive capitalism.
Wow, wait, I really love that idea.
Okay.
That this idea that like it is an experience of historical trauma. Like humans, like this is a cool idea because we've been talking about this a lot in class. Like humans separation from or power over or sort of the nature of culture space.
Yeah.
To think of that as an enactment of the historical trauma.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's. I'm gonna
Thank
keep
you.
going. because
Yeah, that's
I think
great.
we build on it. I'm gonna come back to that slide, but building on that point, there's been some work there. This is specifically like the 3 divides. I have pulled from this group at MIT, but this is not exclusive to them. So the concept of that, right, that especially this kind of, I don't know if we've talked much about like a Cartesian worldview or a mechanistic, modernistic worldview. It's kind of this paradigm of thought that has come to fruition, has become a very dominant way, a dominant worldview that's embedded in our systems. It supports disconnection between the mind and the body. It supports disconnection between ourselves, humans, and nature. It reinforces disconnection between ourselves and other people. And these 3 divides, this ecological disconnection from nature, social disconnection from others, and spiritual disconnection from ourselves, our own psyches and our own beingness, and sense of like connectedness to beyond ourselves. That I would argue, and I'm not the only one who argues that, is a fundamental kind of core wound, right, of the trauma that we all experience that is climate change now, or manifested as climate change. And we can do and have to do a lot to address climate change that looks different than kind of addressing these 3 divides. But if we don't actually address these 3 things, then will we even be able to create the type of transformation that's needed to have climate change, right, that work with that, address it, and have a more sustainable, resilient, kind of regenerative way of living. I'm gonna go more into that, but I want to back up really briefly and just highlight that what we see in terms of people's bodies, that is really revealing environmental injustice. So this is not new. I'm sure you all have studied environmental justice issues, but just to really amplify that it's an embodied experience. It happens on people's bodies, and that's why we gather a lot of health data, mental health data, physical health data, that tells us something is really off, right? How it manifests is through people's bodies. So anything from, salmon and the cultural impact of that on, for example, indigenous tribes in the area, who, the mental health impacts of losing or having a cultural resource, an important resource like that, spiritual resource, food resource, all of that, kind of be reduced, right? They don't have as much access to it and harmed. The ripple out effects from that is evidenced in the data, that we see in a lot of indigenous tribes in terms of health. And this can happen spatially, geographically, in terms of where people are exposed. But there are other ways that environmental injustice shows up in bodies and in populations. So that's one way that we see that. And even if there isn't a very obvious like environmental impact, simply the stressors of, for example, not having enough money to buy an air conditioning unit or access one, the stress of anticipating a summer is coming, what are we going to do? all of that accumulates and may be measurable, or we might not have data on it, but we know that it's true. So thinking about the stress that you're experiencing and that kind of lived experience and having to carry that on a day-to-day basis, that accumulation over time goes back to the shaping, like the iceberg, how you're shaped to be prepared, preparing your own body and yourself and your family for impacts that you know you may not be able to really manage. Okay, so this is just touching back. I'll kind of go over that, but let's talk about healing and repair. So yeah, so kind of we have these three disconnects from ourselves, from nature, from each other. That's really rooted in the worldview that I mentioned and just skipped over that slide. Showing up in our bodies, right? And that, to your point earlier, this person's point earlier, is that it's unique. It's unique to everybody. And we all, you know, are going to have our own lived experience of environmental crisis, but also adding that onto all the layers that we already experience in our lives based on our own identities, intersectional identity, and just what our life looks like. So in somatics, which is kind of this whole body of study, this field and of practice as well, that talks about change happening through reconnecting to the body, right? Through like actually embodying, creating some kind of change within yourself and enacting that in the world. It's both, you know, doing this kind of having a personal transformation, also doing societal transformation. What we talk about is the pathway into a challenging situation is the pathway out. So how we get into some state of survival strategy is going to help us know how to get out of it, how to feel regulated again. If you feel really stressed and you're like starting to tense up your shoulders and maybe like gripping, and you're noticing, yeah, shoulders are up and like everything's kind of tight, the pathway out of that to kind of find yourself back into regulation is to let your shoulders down, maybe ungrip your hands, shake it out, and that'll actually probably shift things. So if we want to get at this, like the core wounding down here, right, of this disconnect that a lot of, you know, as a global society we're experiencing, the pathway is to go back there, right, is to figure out how did we get there. So we can treat symptoms on the surface, and I don't mean to say that in a negative way. Sometimes superficially sounds negative, but I don't mean that at all. I think that the symptoms, right, are of climate change, at least, is that all the impacts that we're experiencing, and we need to address that. And so all of the strategies that are being implemented in terms of mitigation, addressing carbon emissions, that's what I would call is like treating the symptoms of the problem. Next level down is changing systems and changing conditions. So a lot of the systems change work of trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we reimagine and change the energy infrastructure in order to be able to have a different, you know, energy grid and be able to do that. That might be an example of changing systems and conditions. But then deeper down is transforming paradigms of thought and ways of being. And then at the very core, right, reconnecting, doing that reconnecting to yourself, reconnecting to others. And the pathway through, I would say, is one pathway toward that is reconnecting at the very basic level to what you feel, because a lot of the disconnection happens because we're not really feeling. There's a lot of, I won't go into this, but there's a lot of work on taking a relational approach that has a lot of these qualities to systems change. If you're interested, there's more there. And And I'll just leave it at this. I'm really curious to hear, and I want to make space for questions. So we don't necessarily have to spend time answering these, but just presenting some questions for you to reflect on. Is how are you present with your own emotions and physical sensations? How do you practice care of yourself and others? And what do you do in life that brings you joy? And I find it important to say, like, this isn't spiritual bypassing. This isn't saying, like, if we just meditate and, you know, reconnect to ourselves, like everything will be okay. No, it's not. But it's acknowledging the importance of that as one of our many strategies and tools and pathways to actually address what we need to address to find some balance and find some restoration. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I want to make space for questions. So I'll do that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Having been on Zoom the last couple of weeks, I want to make a request for all of you as you ask questions. The speaker is there in the owl, right? And so directing your question there and projecting it is really important. It was sometimes hard to hear the really interesting questions you were asking, and that makes it harder to make sense of the response. So try to project when you ask, okay? Did I kill the questioning?
I don't know, maybe.
I don't know, I feel like we jumped from really specific to really broad really quickly, and so, like, for me, I guess it's like the middle steps. Like, especially like the one with the iceberg that you were like, start with like the surface, like treating your wound, you know, right away, and then working down the list to get to the core of wound. I just always get stuck at like the third one, which is, you know, like changing the systems at play. And I feel like that's something I've been really grappling with in my class with Eli. So I guess like, how, in your view, in your studies, do you see like the best way to go about, you know, changing the systems that keep re-affecting your wound, your traumatic wound, you know, say it be?
Mhm. Yeah, so I'll just, I guess, kind of try to repeat the question in case it didn't get to the owl. Let's see, let's go back. On this slide, like top level seems to be kind of clear, bottom level seems to be kind of clear, but what about in the middle? Like, how does system change actually happen? My response to that is like, yeah, I did this nice like categorization here and just distinguishing between the levels, but like actually just like jumble all of this up. Like they're not really separate. And in fact, I would argue, and in the methodology that I practice, it's all connected. That in fact, you doing this, you know, the work to feel into what am I feeling right now? You know, like let's take a situation. Let's say you experience or observe let's say you witness a microaggression happening, right, toward a friend in a class, and you feel like something in you, you're like, whoa, that wasn't cool. How do you feel that? Can you feel that? And how do you be with that and let that drive you to actually do something? And how is that related to climate change and addressing that? The more we're able to do that, the more we're able to be aware of what's happening inside of us and letting that bring us to an action that is aligned with our ethics, aligned with our values, aligned with the vision that we have of the future. That is what's going to create the capacity to change systems. Because if you think of all of the decision makers, the people who have more power in our systems right now, right? What are they being driven by? When you see something like a regulation come out or something happening in the legal system at the national level, and you're like, that's not cool. That's not best for our climate, our planet. They're probably not feeling into their body and being like, what am I motivated by? What are the values that I'm being driven by? So again, just to come back to that, like this is nice on a screen to see these separate, but actually they're all connected. So what I like to encourage people to do, and what I try to do myself, is identify, in the complex world of systems change, what's the lever that you personally feel driven to pull? And that you have the capacity for, people who are in constant crisis mode because of what's happening in their life. They're not going to be pulling a strong lever, right? They don't have capacity, they're dealing with a lot of stuff. So I think it's important for each of us, if we're talking about, what can we do or what kind of action can we take, and how do we actually make this happen, is assess for yourself, where's my entry point? What am I driven by? What do I have capacity for? What do I have access to in terms of resources or pathways? And trust that everybody else, hopefully, is going to do the same thing. I think that's one thing that a lot of people who are super passionate about the environment and other social issues can get caught up with, is like feeling they have to do it all or have to like give all of themselves. And yeah, do it, but know that everybody else is hopefully doing the same. So hopefully that was helpful. I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah.
I feel like this kind of goes off of this question. What do you do? What is your advice to take when you can't change the systems or conditions that you are in? Because I feel like that's when it feels like the wound is just like getting deeper.
Yeah.
And it's hard to heal when it is actively being cut.
Yeah. A lot of life, isn't it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that in a big way. I think that's where like finding resilience is super important. Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to happen, and I think it feels, oops, I'm pressing things. I think it feels like can feel really hard. And a lot of people, especially I think people who are marginalized, know that like that's, their life. And it's been like that for a long, long time. And learning from a lot of, BIPOC communities, I think especially queer communities and other people who faced conditions that feel insurmountable to change, is like gather your people, your community, and find joy, like find that resilience, and whatever that means for you. And it may sound silly, but it seems like to me, what I've learned and experienced myself is it's a pretty radical technology to be able to do that, to be able to resource yourself enough to get through that. Because and also you need to figure out, do you have hope? Like, where do you get hope? I remember when sitting in your shoes many years ago, I got really disillusioned. I was like, very disillusioned that change would actually happen. And it's taken me a bit to come back into a space of hope. But I really do feel hope, very, very hopeful. And I think that's a practice of being radically hopeful, just as much as it is a practice to have gratitude or other things. You actually have to try. So that's what I would say. I'm sure your classmates have other things to say too. So invite their wisdom as well.
Yeah, kind of like just bouncing off of that as well, like, and also like referring back to like the glacier diagram as well. On one of your slides, it said somewhere about like fight or flight or like dissociation or losing. And kind of just like going back to that topic of just trauma in terms of being in a marginalized community or just being the recipient of microaggressions and stuff like that. As like a student of color who like does want to advocate for certain environmental changes, I guess my question to you is, like, going back to that wheel of feelings, I think personally, as like someone who has grown up in that certain environment and like moving to this state and seeing a whole different type of environment of like this conversation actually being able to happen, to me is such a different level of privilege, because like this type of education isn't even an option where I come from. So like the fact that I can be here, to me just it's still kind of scary. And also at the same time, I think it gives me also a very aggravated bias towards a lot of different types of representations and systems and stuff like that. And to me, it's like, I don't want to be someone who is causing more to the problem by being aggressive. And I guess that's my question, is like, to me, it seems like a symptom on the top of this glacier. How can I alleviate that symptom? Because as like someone in the younger generation, I don't want to be adding to the problem. Causing more microaggressions, more bias to all types of people.
Can you explain a little bit more what's the
How can I separate my aggravated bias?
aggravated bias? Does that mean like feeling aggressive, like
Yeah.
feeling,
Feeling like defensive and stuff towards certain topics that come up, especially when it's major.
yeah,
And I don't want to be someone like that, as someone who like is gonna go into a square, I don't want to be that.
who do you want to be?
I would personally like to be like, I don't know yet. However, I would like to help communities like mine have better environmental, urban spaces and stuff like that, and also a right to quality air, quality water, quality like food security and stuff like that, just because those minimum humane things is something that I have not seen until I came here. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna take this in the direction, tell me if this is off or not, but. Yeah, so these safety strategies, right, they're like I mentioned, they're really smart. And we develop them, we don't have a choice. Instinctively, we don't have a choice in how our body responds to some condition, some environmental situation, right? So whether we're talking about, you know, walking, I'm going to use the street example again, walking down the street and we go to cross the intersection and all of a sudden a car whizzes by and like, whoo, you go back. Like that was your body taking care of itself. Or if we're talking about something socially, you know, yeah, like the microaggression, how you respond to that. Instinctually, you don't, that's just automatic in our nervous system. It's going to take care of us in some way, shape, or form. And so all of these are appropriate and important. But what I hear in your question is about choice. Like how do we slow down time in those moments to create more choice for ourselves and how we respond to situations. And I think that's a process. It's a process. Again, in kind of the methodology and somatic psychology, what we talk about is getting to know what those automatic responses are. And you can do that by observing yourself, just like being self-reflective. You can do that by you know, getting feedback from people, like maybe your friends are a great group of folks who could probably tell you like, oh yeah, when something happens and you get kind of like triggered or thrown off, this is how you respond. You tend to get aggressive, or you tend to just quiet down and shut down all of a sudden. Our relationships are mirrors for how we are. And so usually how we show up in moments of kind of tiny moments of conflict, maybe getting cut off by somebody at the grocery store in line or something, how we react or respond in those moments are generally how we will react or respond in bigger situations, in more extreme situations. So I'd say the first step is to really getting to know yourself and getting to know what are my patterns and habits? How do I generally respond in certain situations? And then from there, then you can start having choice. And why I asked you, who do you want to be? Is like, you may not know exactly what you want to do in life, but you may know who you want to be, meaning, how do you want to show up? When there's a situation and in your community, let's say, how do you want to enter that situation? How do you want to support your community? How do you want to lead? How do you want to, do you want to bring love? Do you want to bring determination? What are some of those qualities or those values that you hold of how you want to be and how you want to enter into this space? So once you know kind of what your pattern is or what your tendency is, and then you know who you want to be, how you want to be, assuming those are different, maybe they're not, maybe they're the same. That's when you can start to practice just a different choice. And that's a process, right? It's being able to, when you feel activated, breathe in the moment. Like, whoa, I got that email from my boss and that just got me really nervous. And now I feel kind of jittery. And I just want to type back and be like, that's not okay. I don't know, maybe I don't know if that's a relevant example, but how can you take that moment, notice that you're feeling activated, notice that your head is hurting or that your heart's racing, and calm down, calm yourself down. And it's not to shut down those feelings. Those are valid, have them, be angry, write that down in your journal, tell your friend, rant. But how you choose, what you choose to do, what you're able to do in the moment depends on you being able to come back to yourself and be like, oh, okay, I just got really angry and I'm going to keep using our defensive or aggressive right there. That's not how I want to respond in the situation, but I need to flush that out in some way, shape, or form, punch a pillow, whatever. And then I can come back to kind of me and who I want to be in the situation. And that is like the key space in terms of changing ourselves and changing how we actually show up in this world.
And we have a question.
Yeah.
Online. And I think this probably speaks, or maybe you can expand on this to contextualize how this practice that you're referring to fits within the broader pursuit of environmental justice. I think that's kind of where this is going.
Okay.
The people in control of the system suffer the least from climate change. And they like each other. And they present, and the present system is designed by them and benefits them the most. So I'm not understanding how improving their spiritual and social well-being, is not good, will result in a system change that benefits those who don't have much influence on it and suffer more from climate change.
Yeah, that's a good question and one that I grapple with. Yeah, so I guess one thing just to really underscore is that, like I said, like this is not the only pathway. This is not the only tool. This meaning like kind of reconnecting, right? Reconnecting to ourselves, our bodies, our kind of sense of holistic self, reconnecting to each other, reconnecting to land. That's not the only pathway for sure. So just to underscore, like we need all the tools in the toolbox, and this is one of them, and I would argue an essential one. But yeah, what do we do about people in power who have been reinforcing and reproducing systems that are harmful? Do we even care about them? I'm saying them, you know, I'm white, I'm definitely a part of that system. And I think here I'd go back to the concept of like the levers, like finding your lever. In systems change, there's it's called a double loop model. And the concept is that you have the existing system that's like on this arc, right? And it's like gets to its peak or like around here. Then it starts kind of like crumbling a little bit. And then the emerging system is coming down here, and like there are these early innovators who are like, ooh, here's some opportunity, we want to change some things. And then they start meeting each other and they build some momentum. And eventually, as the old system is failing, the new system, the emerging system, has enough momentum and resources and kind of, you know, that traction to take over. But this old system, so part of this, the people who are sustaining this old system, the people, and I guess in this case, the question, people in power, people who have privilege, people whose interest is in maintaining this existing system. What do we do? What happens to them, right? And some of them may switch over, and we want those people. Welcome, yes, join this movement to create a new way. But some people are gonna hang on for dear life and keep trying to reinforce this old failing system until as long as they possibly can. And in that case, what that model, and I think what other people would say, is like, how do we hospice? How do we hospice the old system? Meaning, how do we care for this old system and the people who are part of it through the end of that? And I think that's a very generous and kind and compassionate way to meet those people. And I think it's, yeah, I mean, specifically people who are suffering the most from our current systems absolutely need to be at the forefront. Like there's a lot, I won't repeat a lot of what people say already about you know, people at the front lines being at the front line of change. But I think kind of what I'm picking up in that is like, where do we put the energy? And I would say we put the energy in people who are building a food system, but we make space to welcome and we make space to care for, because do we want to replicate, right? This is like transformative justice stuff. If you've been exposed to that at all, do we want to replicate a penalizing system? Do we want to replicate the way that the old system or existing system, I guess, the failing systems treat people? No, because that's just replicating that, you know, we need to get that out of our system. No pun intended there. So yeah, hopefully that was, I don't know, responsive to that question.
So are you kind of saying that not being able to come to terms or grapple with your own trauma or pain is inhibiting you from being able to connect and make a greater change?
I would argue that. I mean, I don't think that healing can be a privilege, I would say, and I want to acknowledge that like not everybody has the resources, not everybody has the capacity, not everybody is in a position to do healing work or even wants to, and I think that's fine. Again, like I said at the very beginning, we all have agency and dignity, and you get to choose what you look at and how you move about the world, and also healing looks different for everybody. You know, healing could be getting together with family on a regular basis. That could be healing for people. Other people, they want to go to therapy. Like it ranges. Other people make art. But like, yeah, I guess how I understand things, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who says this, but I guess it's a bit more of my own perspective, is like, what helps me be compassionate about people who are doing everything in their power to stop change from happening, and everything in their power to continue harmful systems and ways of being, is that they just have a lot of wounds, whether they know it or not, or whether they want to identify it or not. Like, even if the wound is like that, yeah, that disconnection from land or disconnection from their own lineage and ancestry, like, I think we would all be better off if we were able to do whatever healing we have to do, right? Whatever that means for any of us. But I don't think that's necessary. I don't think we can't wait for everybody to heal. Let's put it that way. We can't. So how do we I don't know, one of the other slides, it was like, how do we work at all these, the other iceberg slide, right? That's like, how do we pull all the levers at once? How do we work at both kind of like the top level of changing our energy infrastructure? How do we work at changing people's behaviors in terms of waste? How do we also work at restoring ecosystems while we're also doing some of this kind of inner to outer transformation, inner to outer healing and repair? So yeah, let's not wait. And the more people that can be able to choose how they want to heal and how they want to be well, what well-being looks like for themselves, I think the better, and the more we can support that, the better.
I could ask you 1,000 more questions.
I need to get dinner.
Yeah.
I'm put dinner, and I'm here for it.
But thank you so much for coming to share with us this evening. It was really quite wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.